chapter of our study in the book of Joel. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 17. We've seen in the book of Joel God's judgment on Israel and Judah, sending the plague of locusts that would destroy everything, consume everything, each different type, eating more and more until there was nothing left, until Israel repented. And then we saw the promise, last week we saw the promise of God that He would bring restoration, that He would leave a remnant. Not only that, but He would restore the years that the locusts have eaten. That once they repented, God says, I will bring everything back as if the plague of locusts had never happened. The idea being that it would seem like a distant memory. And we saw that God has shown us that practically in His Word. As we saw with Job, who, after all the plagues and everything, that Job remained faithful, though he questioned God. And even in that questioning of God, and God rebuked him, and rebuked his friends, saying, who are you to speak for me? And rebuked Job, basically saying, who are you to question me? But God, being the God of grace and mercy that He has, restored Job everything that he had lost and more. You see, in spite of what the world tells us, and in spite of what legalistic Christians tell us, the God of the Old Testament is not a God of harsh judgment and wrath. He is the same God that we serve today. Yes, He is a judge. And yes, He does get angry, and He pours His wrath out. And yes, His great wrath will be poured out in the time of the great tribulation. But He's also a God of grace, who maintains life in spite of everything that we do to Him, who gives us gifts that are good and decent, in spite of all that we do to Him, who doesn't hold a grudge against us. And even always leaves a remnant behind. Though the world become worse and worse, God says, I will always leave a remnant. And we see that even in the book of Revelation, during the tribulation after the rapture, that there's 144,000 Jews who will be His witnesses, along with the two witnesses that are identified in the book of Revelation. He never leaves us to our own devices, but He always leaves us with guidance. And so as we look at Joel chapter 3, and we start to see God working here, we see in Joel chapter 3 the judgment of the nations. There is a judgment coming not just for individuals, but God is going to judge the nations, every nation on earth. Take a look at verses 1 through 8. He says, for behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people and have given a boy for an harlot and sold a girl for wine that they might drink. Yea, what have ye to do with your Tyre and Sidon and all the coasts of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if you recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head? Because ye have taken my silver, my gold, and have carried it into your temple, my goodly, pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. Behold, I will raise them out of the place whither ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head, and I will sell your sons and your daughters into the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off, for the Lord hath spoken it. Dear Lord, I thank you for this day, for bringing us here this morning, and I ask, Lord, that as we look at your word and study your word, Lord, that you would open our minds to what you have for us, that you open our hearts to hear, not just with our ears, but with our entire being, what you want us to know, Lord. Lord, we ask that you would help us to see this passage, to understand its meaning, to open our eyes and remove the blinders from us, that we can see your work, not just in your word, but in our daily lives. In Jesus' name, amen. So as we look at this passage, we see God. He starts off, he tells us he's bringing his people out of captivity. So says, for behold, in those days, and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem. He says, there's coming a day when I'm going to bring my people out of captivity. And I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, well, are they in captivity now? Not entirely. But they were. In May of 1948, Israel was reestablished as a nation after nearly 2,000 years of being removed from the planet as a nation, scattered among all the peoples of the earth, in every land, in every country, in every continent where people dwelt. There were children of Abraham. The Israelite people were scattered. And in May of 1948, they were reestablished as a nation, and since that day, Israel has been gathering back together in their land. They're still returning there to this day, and one day they will all return. That is what God is telling us. I find it interesting. I do a little bit of research on one of the big hot topics this election season is immigration, isn't it? I mean, what about these immigrants? What about specifically those who did not come here in the illegal manner, which I refer to as illegal immigrants, but that's politically incorrect. They're undocumented people. But we're concerned about that. We're concerned about the mass immigration because can we as a nation absorb all these people? It's hard enough when they're coming here illegally. And so I started looking and seeing, okay, what are the numbers? Where are these people all coming from? The majority of them are coming from China. But then you have people from India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, many of the Middle East countries. And in spite of what we think, there's a large portion of the Middle East that is generally at peace. Saudi Arabia, as far as I know, is not involved in any wars right now. They're not under attack at all. That's a huge chunk of the Middle East. You know, what nation is under the most attack in the Middle East right now? It's Israel. I found it interesting as I looked through all these places and where people are coming from Haiti and South American countries, and I understood where all these nations, these people were coming from, and you know, quite frankly, nations I would not want to live in. But of all the countries in the world, Israel is the one that is always under attack. They've always, since 1948, they have been under attack. The surrounding nations have been trying to destroy them. The Palestinians have been trying to destroy them. We saw that a year ago. I believe a year ago today. Or was it tomorrow? For pretty close to a year. Where they had this cowardly sneak attack. A terrorist attack against Israel, taking hundreds of hostages. Not just Israeli hostages, but Americans and people from other countries as well, whoever they could. They were murdering people in their homes, men, women, and children in their homes. And this, in spite of what many would say, this is not an act of war, this is an act of terrorism. War does not target civilians. Civilians do die in wars, called collateral damage. It's generally unavoidable. We can minimize it, but it's always going to happen, but we don't target civilians. That was a big difference between, I remember when 9/11 happened, and people started drawing comparisons between 9/11 and Pearl Harbor. Remember those comparisons? And I was sitting there thinking, there is no comparison. The only comparison is they were both sneak attacks. Other than that, there is no comparison. The Japanese attacked a military target. The terrorists attacked, except for the Pentagon, attacked civilian targets. We don't go into war and start shooting civilians. We shoot combatants. If we send in a bomb, are civilians going to get killed? Yes. But we don't target them. We actually try to avoid it. And Israel has been trying to avoid civilian casualties. I have never in my life ever seen someone say, we're going to attack this area in 2 days. If you're not Hamas, get out of there. Israel did that several times. Israel and Hamas are two totally different types of people. Israel's not hiding military ordnance in civilian locations. Hamas is hiding all their military and civilian locations, making civilians a shield. Having said all this, Israel has been under attack since 1948, almost constantly. Do you know how many asylum seekers we get from Israel every year? 0. In spite of the fact that they live in one of the most dangerous nations in the world, that they're constantly under attack, not just from military forces against military targets, but that their civilian areas are being attacked by the surrounding nations. In spite of all that, nobody from Israel is saying, I want to go somewhere else. Why? Because Israel, though they're not Christian, I'm not going to say they're Christian, they're not. They are a nation that was founded by God, and they are trusting God. And God has promised them security. He says, listen, I'm going to call them out. I'm going to bring them back, all of them, to Jerusalem, to Judea, to Judah. He says, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and have parted my land. Boy, that sounds among the nations. They divided up the land, and even as Israel was given back the land, isn't it interesting that Israel was given back this land? And yes, they took some when they were attacked, and shortly after they became a nation again, they were attacked, and they took some extra land. That's, by the way, called the spoils of war. And by the way, if you look at the borders, they didn't take any land that God had not given them. And in spite of all the land that they control, that they have in their possession, they still give land to the Palestinians. They're not trying to destroy them. They're trying to preserve themselves. No asylum seekers from Israel, in spite of all the danger there. And God says, listen, I'm going to assemble all the nations in the valley of Jehoshaphat. That's the valley that leads into Jerusalem. That's commonly where it's accepted. The Bible doesn't really talk about the valley of Jehoshaphat anywhere else except for this passage. But he says he's going to gather people there. And as I've done the research, everyone seems to agree that it's this valley that leads into Jerusalem where Jehoshaphat had a great victory by the hand of God. And he says, listen, I'm going to gather them there. I'm going to try to reason with them. I'm going to plead with them there for my people. I'm going to speak on behalf of Israel. Now, how is God going to speak? I don't know. Here's what I do know: when God speaks, there's no doubt about it who's speaking. And yet, oftentimes, God speaks and people deny it. He says, I'm going to plead for them. I'm going to plead for my heritage Israel, for this land that I've given them. And he speaks of their abuse. He says, there's a judgment coming for the shameful treatment of Israel. That's what this final judgment, this judgment of nations is all about. This judgment of nations is all about how the nations of the world treat Israel. Are you an ally or are you an enemy? I have a spoiler for you. There is no evidence in Scripture that any nation at this time when this happens, that is any nation in the world that stands with Israel. No evidence whatsoever. If God is merciful, maybe there will be. But he says, look at what they've done. You've scattered my people among the nations. You've divided the land. It says you've cast lots for my people. You've gambled with my people. You've given a boy for a house. You traded the young men for a harlot, for a whore. He says, and sold the girl for wine that they may drink. That's how little they value this life. We see that, don't we? This is real life today. That these nations are attacking Israel, and they don't care about civilians, women, children. They want them all dead. When you hear that chant from the river to the sea, what they're saying is, we want to drive Israel into the Mediterranean Sea where they will die. That is their goal. Anyone who says otherwise has no clue what they're talking about. The Palestinian Charter is based on destroying Israel completely, to wiping them off, every Israeli child of Abraham, off the face of the planet. And so, for them, these children are worthless, of no value. If we were to look at tiers in society today, most of us would probably say kind of the lowest tier is a harlot, a prostitute. Kind of the lowest of the low, isn't it? And they say, listen, we don't value these Israeli boys very much. We're going to trade him for her because they think they're getting a good deal. We don't value these little girls very much. We're going to trade her for a drink because we're thirsty. The total devaluation of God's chosen people. Judgment is coming for their shameful treatment, for the abuse of the Israeli children. Judgment is coming for the theft of God's sacred property. So they've taken the land. Not only have they taken the land, it says, and yea, and what happened to you with me, O Tyre and Zidon, on all the coasts of Palestine? Will you render me recompense? Will you repay me? If you recompense me swiftly and speedily, I will return your recompense upon your own head, because you have taken my silver, my gold, and have carried into your temple my beauty and pleasant things. He said, you've taken the sacred things from my land, the sacred artifacts from the temple, those things that were designed to worship me, to bring me honor and glory, God says. You've taken those and you've taken them to your own lands, to your own temple. You've taken them as prizes. The children of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have you sold to the Grecians that you might remove them far from their border. He said, listen, you're trying to get rid of my people. You're selling them into slavery. You're getting them out of the land. You know, that's what they were trying to do when Nehemiah went to rebuild the wall. Why did these kings want them to stop building? Because, listen, they had the people of Jerusalem, the people who remained there, they had them at their mercy. They weren't people to them. They were assets. They were slaves to them. They were possessions to be used and abused. And when the king of Persia said, go ahead and rebuild that wall, they tried everything they could to stop it. They spread lies and rumors and innuendo. They tried to get Nehemiah away from his work to fulfill their desires. And thankfully, Nehemiah was a man of character who would not be shaken. God said, listen, I want to repay you in lifetime. So, well, that doesn't seem very gracious. Well, that's part of what God does, is God judges. He is the judge, and he's a righteous judge. There's no judgment that he makes that is not righteous. We look at things and we see people being convicted and people getting off from the crimes they committed, and we say, well, that's not just. This person was unjustly convicted. This person was unjustly let go. And we talk about all that, and our system makes mistakes. But God doesn't. And so when it comes time for their judgment, he said, I'm going to repay you in like time. They're going to understand what you put them through. He says, behold, I will raise them out of the place where ye have sold them, and will return your recompense upon your own head. I will sell your sons and your daughters in the hand of the children of Judah, and they shall sell them to the Sabaeans, to a people far off, for the Lord has spoken. He says, listen, I'm going to take your nation, and I'm going to give your nation to Israel, to do with them what you've done to Israel. That's rough. When you look at how Israel is being treated now, you think, do any of these nations want that to happen to them? Some of them probably don't care that much. I doubt Hamas cares that much about what Israel does to their people. In fact, Hamas probably, I would venture to say, would say that the more civilians Israel kills in these bombing attacks, the better, because we can accuse them of genocide. Even though Israel is targeting military targets that are hidden behind human shields. See, the fact of the matter is God has blessed Israel. He always has. Even in their exile, he blessed them. People fear Israel. I remember even they'll declare Israel a danger to America, the Jewish people, fearing their influence and fearing their wealth, and even in exile. There's a reason why the Jews have this reputation of being wealthy. Probably because God has blessed them in spite of all things. And then in verse 9 we see them preparing for the final conflict. He says, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war. Wake up the mighty men, when all the men of war draw near, let them come up. Beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. He says, listen, declare this among the Gentiles. You tell the Gentiles, you need to do this. You need to prepare for war. Here's the thing, when God judges that, he said, I want you to be strong when I judge you. There's a saying, you've probably heard it. If you want to be the best, you gotta beat the best. A boxer can't take any pride in beating, the contender that's 26 boxers down the line from the championship. They want to be the best. They have to beat the best. And God's sitting there saying, listen, I want you to be at your strongest. I want you to be at your most powerful, because that's going to highlight my power. He's calling these nations to prepare. The war is coming. And we need to understand this when it comes to Israel, that any effort to destroy Israel is equivalent to rebellion against God. Any effort to destroy Israel is equivalent to rebellion against God, because God has chosen Israel as his favored nation. America is not God's favorite nation. America is blessed of God and has been for over 200 years. But we are not the favored nation. God's done great things in America in our history. And he still is doing great things. But we're not his favored nation. We're not his chosen people. Israel is. The call to this war is one that is going to go out and is going to be irresistible. It says, assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and gather yourselves together round about thither, that thy mighty ones, thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the heathen be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the heathen round about. He says, I'm going to gather them all. I'm going to call them. They're going to come. Not only that, he says, but all your efforts, all your resources, all their efforts, all the resources are going to come to go to war. All of their plowshares into swords, pruning hooks into spears, and they take those implements of peace and make them implements of war. Again, God calling them to come in their strength. It's very similar to what God did in Egypt. When God sent the plagues, he sent them in their strength. He attacked each one of the Egyptian gods individually. The gods that they thought were strong and found out they were weak. They couldn't even preserve their firstborn. Not even Pharaoh chase after Israel. And God took Pharaoh's army in their strength, as the greatest army in the world, and wiped them out in one fell swoop. That is what this is going to be like. You come to me, he says, in your strength, and I will show you how weak you are. It says, put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get ye down, for the press is full, the fat overflow, for their wickedness is great. He said, listen, he's talking about this cup of sin. God has mentioned it before in Scripture, where Israel couldn't go into the promised land, not just because they were disobedient to God and they could murmur and complain, but he also didn't let them go into the promised land because the Amorites, their wickedness had not yet been completed. They came. God said, listen, I'm going to give them a certain time. There's going to be this cup. And when this cup is full, when it's overflowing, that's when you're going in. And so, when this happens, this is when the wickedness of the world is at its peak. As bad as the world is today, it is nothing compared to how it will be when this happens. They're going to be there. They're going to put Jerusalem under siege in the valley of Jehoshaphat, which is the entry to Jerusalem. And the sin meters are going to be full. It says multitudes in the valley of decision, for the Lord is near in the valley of decision. Talking about the valley of decision, this valley of judgment, where the nations are going to be judged. This is not, by the way, Armageddon. This is the battle in the tribulation, the end of the tribulation. Armageddon, whole different thing. Armageddon happens after the 1,000-year reign, when Satan is released from the bottomless pit, and he rallies people on earth who have just experienced 1,000 years of peace and prosperity, and still people will rise up against the Lord. Totally different. Look at verse 15. It says, the sun and the moon shall be darkened, and the stars shall withdraw their shining. The Lord also shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. For the Lord will be the hope of his people, and the strength of the children of Israel. He says, listen, here's the environment of this battle. All of a sudden they're going to be there, and the sun and the moon are going to be darkened. The stars are no longer going to shine. We're not talking about an eclipse here. We're talking about the absence of all natural light. I don't even know if people have flashlights if they're going to work. I don't know if lights on tanks and military vehicles will work. Maybe God's going to shut out all light. I don't know. But we know that the sun's not going to be shining. The moon's not going to be shining. The stars aren't going to be shining. And we can't even imagine what that's like. Because we live in this, most of us, some of us live in a city or a place where there's enough light from our houses or street lights or whatever, porch lights, where we can't see all the stars in the sky. You have to get someplace pretty barren of light sources to see the stars. If you turn down all the lights, you'd be able to see them perfectly. But this is going to be a situation where these lights aren't going to be there anymore. And it's not because they're drowned out by the lights. It's all going to be dark. Darkness is spooky. There are certain things in life that are spooky, aren't there? I'm working overnights, getting ready for inventory. I was working on, actually, I guess it was still Friday night, and I was on my machine, I'm going around doing the job that I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know where everyone else is. I don't hear anything from anyone else. I don't see anyone else in the building. I've been in a bunch of aisles, and I don't see anyone. And I'm riding down the front to get to a certain place, and this machine I'm driving, the lights are dim, they're not all the way out. There's no one around me. And I hear this howling noise. I'll admit, my heart went, what's that? Turns out I was right in front of the Halloween display, and they have these skeleton dogs that howl, and they're motion activated. But it's spooky. I hear them all the time when I'm working during the day, and I walk by there, and people go by, and they press the little button to make them howl, and they do all this stuff, and you hear it all the time. But when you're there alone, and there's no one else there, and the lights are dimmed, and you hear this freakish howl, it's a little disconcerting. And I can imagine that if I was in that building and the lights were completely out, and I'm walking through there, and I hear this freakish howl, that would be downright frightening. I'd be like, is there a wolf in this building? I don't stand a chance against a wolf in a dark building. I know that. That's what this is like. It's surrounded by total darkness. It says, and the Lord shall roar out of Zion, and utter his voice from Jerusalem, and the heavens and the earth shall shake. It says, God's going to speak from Zion, from Jerusalem, from the place of where he reigns, the place where his earthly throne will be. And when he speaks, the earth will shake. And that speech that the people will hear, it's going to have one of two effects. It's going to be like a skeletal hound howling in a darkened Home Depot. Or it's going to be a sign of hope for those who trust in him. He says that the Lord will be the hope of his people and the strength of the children of Israel. Why does Israel still exist? Because God is Israel's strength. He always has been, and he always will be. It says, so shall you know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain. Then shall Jerusalem be holy, and there shall be no strangers pass through her anymore. He says, listen, then when that happens, you will know, everyone will know, the world will know that the Lord is the God of Israel, that he reigns in Zion, in his holy mountain, in Jerusalem. He says that there shall be no strangers pass through her anymore. No one who doesn't belong there will be there anymore. See, judgment is coming. The judgment of the nations is coming. And God will judge faithfully. And in that judgment, God's going to show Israel once and for all time that he is their God, that they are his people, and that he is in control. We forget sometimes that God is in control, don't we? We start thinking, how can this happen? You know how it happens? It happens because God's in control. Bad things happen to you, God's in control. Good things happen to you, God's in control. Isn't it funny how oftentimes when bad things happen, we like to blame God, and when good things happen, we like to take the And he will reveal himself in truth and in power. And in that day, Christ will return, not the rapture, will be raptured first, but Christ will return, and he will set foot in Jerusalem, and he will rule the world for 1,000 years to show us what a perfect government is like. And amazing as it sounds, at the end of the 1,000 years, there will still be a bunch of discontented, whiny people. And when Satan is released from that 1,000 years in the bottomless pit, he will raise up an army of people who, in spite of the prosperity and the grace of God that has been manifested for 1,000 years on this planet, will raise them up to rebel against God. And people wonder why I think